All right, so this is a bonus episode of the Uptime Podcast. Lucky you, because Rosemary is talking about blade recycling. And there's a lot of new blade recycling initiatives around the world, and particularly in Europe, where 6 blade recycling factories will be built between now and 2030. Now, there's a lot of questions about what the right approach is, which is the lowest carbon dioxide method to recycle blades. Should we bury them? Should we not bury them? Should we turn them into furniture? This is a really good bonus episode, well worth listening, because there's a lot of good viewpoints about this. I'm Alan Hall, president of WeatherGuard Lightning Tech, and I'm here with my good friend from Wind Power Lab, Joel Saxum, and the soon-to-be guest host of the Fully Charged live event in Australia, Rosemary Barnes. And this is the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Well, Rosemary, Denmark-based Continuum is planning to build 6 large-scale wind turbine blade recycling facilities all across Europe. The first factory is scheduled to be built in southwest Denmark, of course. Why else build anywhere else? And it's going to be in operation at the end of 2024, end of next year. The second factory is planned for the UK. It's going to be all 6 factories, they think, are be done by 2030, right? So they're actually going to meet a 2030 goal. Each factory can process a minimum of 36,000 tons of blades a year. That's a lot of blades. And they're going to turn this into construction material. It doesn't sound like they're going to burn it. It sounds like they're going to chop it up and add it to concrete or other construction-related materials to reinforce them, make them better. You got fiber in there, right? So that makes sense. You could chop it up and reinforce different things. Question is, with GE/LM working on recyclable blade resins, same thing for Siemens Gamesa. They've got this super breakdownable resin for these recyclable blade projects. Does this all make sense? If I'm going to build a factory to recycle blades and they're going to make blades recyclable in a different way coming up like now, there seems like there's a mix of technology and factories going in the wrong direction. Which one is the right path?
Well, I think the eventual right path is to have blades that are really easily recyclable. But in the meantime, we need a way to recycle all the blades that already exist. And so this would be that method. But I haven't seen too many details of it because there's already ways to recycle blades depending on what your definition of recycling is. I'm pretty sure in Germany it's already illegal to send them to landfill, and so they're processing them all in a cement kiln. So that's one way of doing it. You can also, there's the range of things you can do. You can shred them and put them into like low structural requirements applications, like they put them in decking material, or they can make them into, composite panels for truck beds or dashboards, stuff like that doesn't really have too much structural requirement. So it's okay to, just kind of like shred the fibers. This process, I'm assuming, is different to those, but I haven't actually seen enough detail to say for sure. But I think it is really interesting with blade recycling. People really hate to put them into landfill. But in terms of CO2 emissions, that's probably the best thing that you can do with them, just about, because while they're in landfill, they're, all the carbon that's in them is staying underground. If you burn it, for example, then instead of landfill, then you are using air fill, the CO2 is going into the atmosphere, which isn't helpful. So people tend to conflate the two issues of plastics and plastic waste with climate change, kind of assuming that what's good for one is good for the other. And in so many cases, it's kind of actually a tension. They're in opposition. I did see with this method, this new method that Continuum has, they're saying that it's CO2 neutral. I haven't seen the details, so I don't know how they arrive at that. And, it is sometimes people call things CO2 neutral, but it's really because they, paid a farmer in Zimbabwe to not cut down a tree or something stupid like that. So I would like to see more details. But that's at least, better than the norm. I was just listening to a Bloomberg NEF podcast yesterday. I think it's called Switched On. It's pretty good one. Not as good as ours, obviously, but second option if people want to find another another podcast to listen to. And this episode was on petrochemicals and trying to reduce emissions from that industry. And one of the experts that they had on did mention that, if you burn, one of the biggest problems with decarbonising petrochemicals is the end of life stuff. And obviously, if you burn plastics, then you're going to release that CO2 into the atmosphere. But he also mentioned that there's some recycling methods. I mean, all recycling methods have some CO2 emissions, and some kinds of chemical recycling actually have higher emissions associated with them than if you just burnt the plastic. So
get out. Really?
Yeah. So it sounds super green. It sounds like, no brainer. Of course, we should be recycling all our plastics, but if you're primarily concerned about climate change, then it's definitely not that straightforward. And I personally think, like, if you're not land constrained, like the US and Australia, we actually don't have too much problem with running out of space for landfill. It's not a bad place to store the blades, while we come up with better recycling methods. I'd rather see blades in landfill than, all the carbon in them emitted into the atmosphere. That's for sure. Europe's a bit of a different question because they do struggle to find space for landfill, and so that they have other reasons for not wanting to do that. But it is one of those topics where, it sounds really obvious that if you love the environment, then of course you should want to recycle everything. It's not always better for climate change, though.
Upcycling, that's my favorite, right? When someone's taking these turbines and turning them into chairs and desks and park benches and stuff, I think it's super cool.
Oh, yeah.
But my problem with it is I talked to someone the other day that was like, check this desk out. And I was like, man, that desk is sweet. It had like the trailing edge slid out and was for your keyboard. And I was like, well, how much for it? It's like $3,500. It's like, man, who's paying that for a desk?
Yeah. I hope they covered up the carbon fiber well.
Yeah,
that stuff is so itchy. It's not like a surface I would want to be laying my hands all over every day.
They did a fantastic job on it. Like the desk itself they had even like refinished the gel coat, so it was like a matte finish almost on it, and they covered the ends and like sanded it well, and it was done really well, and like the legs were made out of parts of the shear webs and stuff like that, but like smoothed out and whatnot. And it had the power thing in it. You could go up and down with it, but
that's a must.
Yeah.
Sit stand is a must, especially if you've got a baby who wants to nap on you all the time. Then that's the way you can get some stuff done with the baby in the carrier and standing up at the sit stand desk. Highly recommend. I did actually talk to some architectural firm a little while ago, and actually it's just reminded me that we never went anywhere. I should follow up, but they wanted to make like facades and like architectural features out of bits of wind turbine blades, and they look so cool if you cut them in cross section so you can see the layers of glass. It looks really nice. They were going to like make some nice paneling out of it, but it is kind of gimmicky. It's not an environmental solution. It's more just like it's a cool product. They look cool. It makes you reminds you that it's something to do with clean energy, and that gives you warm, fuzzy feelings, but it's not a recycling solution. Like, I get kind of irritated when you see in your social media feed, oh, here's a bike shelter made from a wind turbine blade. See, you can do something with it. And it's like, how many bike shelters do we actually need? Or like playground equipment, or what? Like, is every single pedestrian bridge and I don't know, picnic table, it's just all going to be wind turbine blades or across the whole world to, get rid of a meaningful amount of this stuff. I don't know. I don't see it as a scalable solution. And I mean, they are pretty much totally inert. A lot of, like anti clean energy types try and say that they're toxic. It's totally rubbish, like they're inert. They're going to look exactly the same. If you dig them up in 50 years, they're going to look the same as they do now. And that does sound like, to me, it's not a problem. Like, instead of thinking of it as landfill, just think of it as, long-term storage. You put them there and wait until we have the technology to properly recycle them in a way that's actually, got good environmental outcomes.
I'll give you another story from the state of the great state of Wyoming. So if you've ever driven out there, so if you've driven in Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Utah, parts of Colorado, you'll see snow fence. Right? So snow fence is designed, it's on the edge of the right of way so that when that wicked wind blows, it doesn't create drifts across the highway. Why not use wind turbine blades for snow fence? Then you can use hundreds of miles of them.
I'm filling out the LLC paperwork right now, Joel. We should be in business by tonight.
So I want to go back to the beginning of this conversation for Rosemary. So here's a thought I was having while you were kind of running through your first, the chatting about the 6 factories over in Europe and those things. So as the Reliablade, the Zebra project, all these things are put in the resin or the resins that are optimized for recycling together right now. So it was RWE that installed the recycled blades already? Was it just this fall? So that was on the Casket C or something like that in Germany. So now they've installed those now. So their lifespan is 20 years, 25 years. So even if they're building these 6 factories that can break these turbines down as we have them today, if a turbine was installed today and it wasn't a recyclable blade, you have 20, 25 years of the possibility of these factories operating. How does someone justify the CapEx to build these factories, understanding that in probably 25 to 30 years, they're going to be either have to be repurposed for something else or they're just going to be shut down because everything else is going to have this new recyclable resin technology in it. So how does a company?
I think that sounds like a good duration for a factory, doesn't it? I mean, wind turbine blade factories that were built 25 years ago they're not still operating close to, they would have been, in that case, built to do what, like 10, 15, maybe 20 meter blades. So if they do still exist, then they've had to build whole new facilities on top of them to deal with today's blades. To me, that doesn't sound that wrong of a project duration. And bearing in mind that it's not like, okay, so the very first turbine with the very first 3 recyclable blades has been installed, it doesn't mean that from next year 100% of blades are going to be made that way.
Correct.
It's going to be a changeover, and until people start mandating that you have to do it this way, I don't think it's going to take the bulk of the market. And I would expect that's still 5 years away. I don't know, but that would be my guess.
Okay, so if we do an average of 36,000 divided by 5 tons, that's 7,200 blades per factory per year. Divide that by 3, that's 2,400 turbines or the blades per factory per year. That's 14,000 turbines per year for those 6 factories to be able to process if they're running at 100% capacity, which they won't. Industry capacity today, those 6 factories handle every blade that comes out or that gets pulled off of a turbine.
The answer to Joel's question about why, snow fences or, any other random thing you can think of, why aren't these made out of wind turbine blades? It's because the cost of getting wind turbine blades to, wherever is more than the cost of buying a new product from a, established supply chain. It's whenever I work on these kind of projects that want to recycle wind turbine blades or repurpose them into other stuff, that's always the biggest problem that, you're decommissioning wind farms at all sorts of random locations. So you have to temporarily go set up some processing plant on site, or you have to transport whole blades, which is, just like ridiculously expensive for a nearly valueless material. It's worth it. The cost to get the blades there is worth it because you're building a very valuable wind turbine. But at the end of the life, you've got some building product or whatever that's not quite the way you would ideally like it to be. They're curved, and then if you slice a blade into pieces, the curve at the root is very different to the curve at the tip, and so that's why you need like an architectural firm with their 3D their CAD design to be able to slice it up and reassemble it into cool architectural shapes. That's what you need. Otherwise, your snow fence is going to be totally wonky and full of holes, and not really do anything. Not to mention the extra emissions from trucking these things, all the way across the country or shipping them across the world. Like, that's definitely not a good environmental outcome. It just gives people a warm fuzzy from from thinking that we're not wasting something.
Yeah, it's like we talked about a couple of weeks ago about ocean cleanup stuff when you brought up the points of the emissions from the vessels going out there to the plastic patch. What is the reality of it, right?
China's making blades out of whatever, and I don't see them making recyclable blades tomorrow. Central America, South America is probably going to make them out of epoxies because it makes sense. It just makes sense. The supply chain's there. They're going to do it. I think you're taking a risk making out of recyclable resin because no one has any experience with it in large-scale structural applications. If you have a recyclable method at the end that has proven itself to work, then I think you, as an OEM, I start thinking I'm not going to pay for this super expensive recyclable resin when I have a recycling method that I trust and has been validated as being CO2 neutral. I go, we're out. We're out of the recyclable resin system. I think that's inevitable, right? Now, what am I missing here, Rosemary?
You're missing ESG goals.
Oh, but you have to care about landfill. Like for the climate, for net zero, sure. It's not a problem. Landfill, but I don't care about landfill. I care so much less about landfill than I care about airfill. I just don't want to put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Landfill, if it's well managed, is not, it's not like you cut up these wind turbine blades and then and properly put them into a well managed landfill. Microplastics aren't making it into, sensitive ecosystems from that. They're inertly doing whatever. I think we have 1,000 bigger problems to put our smart brains onto at the moment than worrying about, fully circular economy for every aspect of energy technologies, personally.
So Joel, I'll let you be the arbiter here. Did I just convince Rosemary that it's okay to stick with old resin systems and to shred up blades? I think I just did that.
I heard it.
Did that just happen?
You heard it here. January 19th, 2023, 5:40 p.m. Central Time.
No, I'm all for recycling. I'm pushing the ocean cleanup, even though Rosemary hates me. No, she didn't hate me for it, but she disapproves. She sends me disapproval messages via Slack all the time about it. But I am for recycling, but I think there's a thing that makes sense, right? And the scale and the economy.
There's a pragmatic view to it as well.
Yeah, you have to know what you're trying to achieve. What problem are you trying to solve? And recycling it's not a climate solution. It's a plastic waste solution. And you have to have a problem with it going into landfill for some other non-climate reason to bother is my opinion.
I'd say put them in. If you're a rancher that has wind farms and they're decommissioning them, line those things up 3 wide and take a D10 over the top of them, crush them up, and then put a cap of class 5 on it. And now you've got a nice road with a stable bed that won't sink into the mud in the spring.
Joel, you bring up this. I wasn't going to say it, but now you made me say it. I happened to be sitting on an airplane for a couple of hours next to a guy. I got upgraded to first class. It's probably one of the few times this has ever happened in my life. So it's
Weather
memorable.
guide lightning tech.
So I'm sitting next to a guy who, well, yeah. We're moving up in the world. So I'm sitting next to a guy who does roads. They do improvement for roads, and they were adding glass to asphalt to make the roads not have potholes anymore. And he said, you wouldn't believe how great these roads are. They never had potholes. Kids are out skateboarding, riding their bikes. There's no holes in the road. Thinking, that'd be great because it's expensive. Okay. I just gave you a huge supply of chopped fiber, make your asphalt roads, and get rid of my potholes. 2 problems.
I mean, that's how you've been making strong concrete for years, right? For 100 years. Yeah. Is putting fiber in it. I mean, and it comes in 50-pound bags. Just dump it in and mix it up. It's the same thing.
Dump it in.
But you can get that carbon fiberglass, from other industries too. I think wind turbine blades is something like 5% of global composite volumes. So it's really interesting to me that wind turbine blades are the only industry where you care about what happens to that at the end of the life and not the 95% of the rest of it.
It's because clean energy is a political issue. That's why we know this.